Hi, my name is Mike Adler. I'm a technical marketing engineer in Enterprise Wireless Group. In this video recording, we're going to discuss MDNS configuration of the Catalyst iOS XE release 17.3.1. We're going to discuss all the configuration options of all the features of the MDNS on the Catalyst controllers. Please note, in this video presentations, we are not going to deep dive into every single parameter and every single option of MDNS configuration. For additional details, please refer to this MDNS technical guide at the link as indicated below. Before we deep dive into configuration of the MDNS feature on Catalyst controller, let's have a quick review and see what is MDNS services and why is it so important to have the functionality on the Catalyst controllers. As you may know, the MDNS services, or sometimes called also as a Bonjour services, is a service that is being advertised by Apple TV devices, or it could be any other device that advertises in a form of the multicast service. In such a way, since it's a multicast service, it's only traverses the network on the layer 2 domains. So if it's being advertised on the VLAN, other devices cannot see those services. Or if there is a router at the end of the subnet, this multicast services cannot also traverse through the router. Therefore, what we're doing is when the services advertise on any VLAN attached to the wireless Catalyst controllers, we cache these services on the controllers, and then it doesn't matter if these services being advertised wirelessly or wired, as is it in this example with AirPlay and AirPrint. We cache these services on Catalyst controllers, and then we advertise those services to all the clients that attached, and it doesn't matter if the service is being advertised on the same or on a different VLAN. Also, it's important to note that MDNS services operate on UDP port 5353, and they can transport via IPv4 group addresses 224.0.0.251 or IPv6 group addresses FF01::FB. Now, in this illustration or diagram, as you can see, we have here multiple VLANs. For example, this VLAN 20, where we have Apple TV is advertising wirelessly the Apple TV services. We have VLAN 99, where we have some users that trying to use those services from different VLANs, and they basically scanning and searching for those services. We have AirPrint and Apple file system devices that advertise their services while wired connected to this switch. And then we have MDNS AP also tunneling the services from a different subnet into the wireless controller, and all these services being cached on the Catalyst controller. So you can see you have here a Bonjour or MDNS services such as AirPlay, AirPrint, Apple File Server from different VLANs being cached on the controller. And the users, such as, for example, in VLAN 99, they all can consume or see and use these services regardless which VLAN or subnet they are located. Before we get into specific MDNS configuration workflow and going through all these configuration steps, let's just do a quick overview of how the configuration is being done on the Catalyst9800 series wireless controller. It's quite a bit of departure from the way we used to do configuration on our AirOS wireless controllers such as 5508 or 5520. The concept here is somewhat changed, and let's just take a look at it. So first of all, we start here with configuring different profiles like WLAN profile, policy profiles, and then we map them into the policies. Same thing we're doing with the AP join profile and profiles. With flex profiles, we also map them with the site tags. And then finally, RF tags where we tag these RF created profiles and different policies, and we map everything to the access point. To simplify the process and to help you with the configuration process, we added this function or table right into the wireless setup advanced configuration. As you can see, there's a flowchart of the design phase where you can specifically see step by step how you create profiles, how you create different policies, and how you then tag all these policies in profiles and eventually apply all of these created profiles and policies to the access points. So that's kind of a simplified and quick explanation of how configuration is being done on the Catalyst controllers. Now let's take a look at the specific steps that we'll go through in configuring MDNS. So first of all, to enable MDNS services, we're going to enable it globally on the Catalyst controller. Then we're going to work with the service definitions. We're going to define service list and apply them to the in or out interfaces. We're going to create service policies, and then we'll also create a designated location where these services can be used. After that, we're going to create MDNS policy profiles and tag all of these into the policy. Next step would be configuring actually MDNS on the WLAN itself. So WLANs have its own checkbox to basically turn it on or off. So beside enabling globally, you're going to enable MDNS on WLAN. And then you're going to tag all the earlier created policies to that specific WLAN. Eventually, we're going to map all these policy and profiles to the APs, as we were explaining before in these steps. And optional steps we're going to discuss here as, for example, creating Flex Connect MDNS policies. So now in release 17.3, we have an option to actually cache all the MDNS policies right on the Flex Connect APs. So in case you have a Flex Connect group configured somewhere and you lose connectivity to the controller, the users in that Flex Connect group still can use the services. We're also going to show you quickly how to configure Gasland with MDNS and also remote LANs with MDNS policies. And finally, we're going to look at some of the monitoring options we have on the Catalyst controller when it comes to MDNS services and what MDNS clients are using those services. So let's actually get to the MDNS configuration. As you can see, there are MDNS, and we mentioned it earlier, you have to enable it at the global level, and you also have to enable at the WLAN level. So again, by default, if it's not enabled, the MDNS is going to be in a bridging mode. And basically, we're not going to capture or cache any of the services at the controller level. Same thing goes on WLAN. If it's not enabled, it's going to be just in a bridge mode. And you can also set up a drop mode on the WLAN level. So these are just kind of a primary configuration steps, and we'll go in details and show you how to configure and enable these services. Okay, so as we discussed in the previous slides, we have to enable MDNS services at the global level. Once it's enabled, we are significantly reducing the multicast traffic on the air. With that, we also have to configure the transport level. You have an option here to configure IPv4 or for IPv6. You also have to configure this active timer query. Active timer query, basically a timer at which point you have to refresh the services that are being cached at the controller level. Default timer is 30 minutes. We're also configuring here MDNS AP service policies. This is the service policies that we're configuring in the following steps. The next steps in MDNS configuration is actually configuring a service list. So by default, as soon as we enable MDNS services on a global level, we're going to get default MDNS service policies and also default MDNS service list. However, if you want to create your own service lists with specific services, you can create in these steps. So you would go to MDNS and then under service policies, choose service list. And in this service list, you can add services as we have here. For example, AirTunes, Airplane, printer services, Apple TV services. And again, you can add a bunch of other services from the list of available services. As is shown here in this presentation, you just click on the services and they move to assigned services. You can also assign those services for the in direction, out direction. So basically in direction, they will be applied on request ingress filter, and out direction will be applied on respond egress filter. So these filters, when they applied, will allow the services to be seen in one direction and filtered in out directions. In the previous step, we added all the services available by default or pre-configured on the controller. Now, in case a customer wants to create a custom definitions or custom services, it's also available on the Catalyst controllers. To create these custom service definition, you would go to MDNS service policies, and under service definitions, you would create a new service definition, like in our case would be Bonjour SP1. And then in that list, we add service types that we would like to add into our service list. So, for example, this is a default table here with different MDNS service types. And I just picked 3 of these definitions from the list and added them to these service types to the list. Once you create this custom list with custom service types definition, you can add them to the service list as was defined in the previous step. So as you see in the previous steps, we configured AirTunes, AirPlay, and then you can also add here this custom service list. So you would have all these services plus this custom services list. In these steps, we actually going to create a service policies, and we're going to add all the lists of service types that we defined and created before and configure them in the service policies. So you would go to MDNS configuration again, and under service policy, choose a service policy. And here, as in our example, we create a TME Bonjour service policy 1. In this service policy, we would add the service list we created for the input and service list for the output as we created in the previous step. Here, we also define a location of these services availability. So the services can be defined or to be available on that SSID specific, or can be defined by different locations. We'll discuss specifics of location configuration in the next step. So as I mentioned before, you can create these location services based on different parameters. Previous parameters available with our services and DNS services were location-specific services, or LSS we call them. And these are based on AP neighbor list of the RRM. So basically any clients that connected to, say, a specific group of APs would be able to use the services, no other clients. So we can also create, for example, a a location-specific services or localizations based on the service tags or AP names. So we can say only clients that connected to APs with AP names as we define can use the services. So other clients will not be able to use the services, and so on. So again, these are several ways you can localize these services as we describe in the next step. So as explained before, these location-specific services, when applied, they can be used by the clients only in that localization area. Services outside this areas would not be available, or clients cannot use them. You can apply these based on SSID, AP location, AP name, location-specific services, and then by the regex of or regular expressions of location name of the APs and site tags. So there are different ways to localize the services Catalyst controller. Please note that wired services instances cannot be subjected to specific AP localization. It's only applied to the wireless services. In this next step, we're actually going to create, or we can modify one of the existing policies on the Catalyst controller. So as is in this example, you can see that we're taking TME Bonjour policy profile 1 and go to advanced tab, and under advanced tab we find here MDNS service policy definition, and here we choose the service policies that we previously configured and map it to the MDNS policy, or for that fact, it could be any policies that already exist on the Catalyst controller, or we can even attach it to default policy profile. Now we have to configure MDNS services on the WLAN itself. As we mentioned at the beginning of this video presentation, when we create a WLAN, you can enable or disable MDNS gateway services specifically on any given WLAN or SSID. So as you can see, we created here a WLAN TME Bonjour, or we could go for that fact and modify any other existing WLANs that we have on the Catalyst controller. Then we would go to Advanced tab, and there is an option where you can configure MDNS mode of the WLAN. As you can see, you have all these available modes that we discussed before: bridging, gateway, or drop mode. Once we configure this MDNS services on the WLAN, we go to the next step, which is add to policy tags, and here we map the WLAN with the policy profile that we created in the previous step. In the previous step, we mapped a previously created MDNS policy profile to the WLAN. Another way to create this mapping or map these policy profiles to WLAN is actually going to tags and profiles, and under policy tab, you can choose a WLAN and map it to a specific policy created in the previous step. So as you can see, we go here to create a policy tag Bonjour TME, and here we map a WLAN profile or WLAN we created in the previous step to the policy profile. So this is again kind of a repetitive step, what you can do right from WLAN configuration, or you use the steps if you want to map this policy profiles to multiple WLAN in one place. And this final step, as we discussed in the beginning of this video presentation, we take all these different policies and profiles we created, in our case MDNS policies and profiles and WLAN profiles, and we map them to a set of APs or to a group of APs. So as you see in this example, we have a list of MAC addresses of APs available to us, and we take a one AP, or we can tag all these APs and map to these APs different policy tags, site tags, and RF tags. Once we mapped it, you can go to, for example, a specific MDNS record or service type and see to which AP, MAC address, and site tag these services being advertised on. In this step, we're briefly going to describe just the new service available on Catalyst Controller Release 17.3. In this release, we added support for MDNS services availability on the FlexConnect AP in remote sites. As you can see, you still go through this configuration of all the policies and profiles on the Catalyst controllers. Once these policies profiles push to FlexConnect APs, they can work independently from the Catalyst controller or local network, even if these WAN connections are down. And in these FlexConnect groups in remote sites, one of the FlexConnect APs will take up on itself a role of master MDNS AP, and it will cache all the services on that AP, and then advertise and sync up these services with all the other FlexConnect APs available in that remote site. As indicated in release 17.3, you will see there's a new tab available under MDNS configuration for MDNS Flex Profile. So let's go ahead and create a Flex Profile for MDNS services. In our case, we'll have a Bonjour Flex Profile created where we specify the cache update timer for the Flex Profile, the update timer, and also on which VLANs these profiles will be applied. Remember, again, we configure everything on the Catalyst controller, and then these profiles and services will be pushed to the FlexConnect APs. After we created the Flex Profile or MDNS Flex Profile for the FlexConnect APs, we'll go to the tags and profiles in the configuration menu, and under tag site, we will create the Flex site. As was shown in the diagram, we had two Flex sites, Flex site A, Flex site B. In this show an example here, Flex site A will map the earlier created MDNS Flex Profile. And the last step here is just to make sure that we do not enable local site, so that we can, when we apply this site tag to the AP, the APs will inherit the FlexConnect AP capabilities. In this configuration setup, we're going to show you here how to set up MDNS Gasland configuration profile. So you're doing it by going to Configuration Wireless Gasland tab, and under this tab you create a MDNS Gasland profile. In this general tab under Gasland profile, you have to also enable gateway. If not enable, it will be in bridged mode, and you enable the status for that Gasland profile. Also, to work with the wired services on that VLAN, you have to enable wireless LAN status and choose the wireless LAN ID on which we want to use the MDNS services. The same can be done from the CLI interface, as you can see on the foreign and anchor controller. In some cases, it might make more sense, and it's easier to configure these profiles from the CLI interface. And the final optional configuration we'll discuss is MDNS RLAN configuration. You're doing it by going to configuration, tags and profiles, remote LAN, and there under RLAN profile, you create a RLAN profile. You make sure that you enable that profile and also enable the MDNS mode as gateway for it to work on the RLAN profile ID as specified here. After that, you go to the next step in configure RLAN policy. you configure RLAN policies and map it to the MDNS service policy as we created in the previous steps. Finally, after we did all of our MDNS services configurations, we can go to monitoring mode and observe some of the cache services available on the controller and if client can use the services. As you can see here, a demonstration where we show that the global services or MDNS gateway services are disabled on the controller, and we're also going to disable these MDNS services on the WLAN, basically putting them in bridging mode. Then MDNS gateway mode is disabled. If we go and observe the MDNS services available, you'll see that there's no MDNS services available on a controller when we look under monitoring MDNS services. At the same time, if you look under clients, we'll see that the clients are available on the wireless clients are available on that WLAN. Now in this next step, we are demonstrating that when MDNS gateway service is disabled on a global level and we just enable them on the WLAN level, where we configure MDNS mode to gateway mode, then going back to monitoring mode and looking at the MDNS services, you'll still see that there is absolutely no record available on the controller, so none of the services being cached. At the same time, you can see that we do have these wireless service providers such as Apple TV are connected to the wireless WLAN, and they are connected and advertise their services. In this next step, as you can see, we demonstrating that MDNS gateway services enabled on the global level and they are disabled on the WLAN level. So MDNS mode on the WLAN is in bridging mode, not in the gateway mode. As you can see, now you can see that when you go to monitoring mode, the MDNS services, all the services that being advertised or available on a controller are only wired services. There is no wireless services available or cached on the Catalyst controller. And at the same time, you can still see that we have the same wireless client, which are, in our case, are wireless service providers such as Apple TVs. They're connected to wireless LAN and they advertise services. However, when you go to the record, you can see that only wired services are shown on the Catalyst controller. At the same time, you can see that their TTL time or time to live time that shows how much time these services have still available for services or users to be using these services. And finally, we're demonstrating in these screenshots here when MDNS gateways are enabled on both global level and MDNS is also enabled on the WLAN. Now if we're going to the monitoring mode and look at MDNS settings, we'll see all the MDNS services that being advertised, all the records being advertised on the wired and wireless type of connections. And of course, you also see here the TTL times, as we mentioned before, for how much longer these services are being available or cached on the controller. Again, as you can see, we're still showing here that the same wireless service providers are being connected to the WLAN. This concludes our video presentation about MDNS wireless services configuration on the Catalyst wireless controllers. For additional details or specific parameters configuration, please reference technical guide at this link. Thank you.